Good morning. Could I welcome you all to the Public-Petitions-Committee, and could I ask everyone to turn off their Blackberries or mobile phones because it does interfere with our sound system. We have had apologies from Jackson Carlo, who's been delayed, but we are expecting him, so I'm hoping he'll be into the meeting at some stage in the future. So agenda item 1 is consideration of new petitions. The first item of business today is consideration of new petitions, and there are 4 new petitions for consideration today, and 2 are from the same person, Mr James Mackey. As agreed, the committee will hear evidence in respect of 2 of the new petitions. There's been a change of circumstance for PE 1462, treatment of cystic fibrosis. I'll go into detail about this when I reach this item in question. If I start with PE 1454 by Natalie Robb on hyperemesis-specialist-nurses, members of a note by the clerk, despite briefing on the petition. And can I welcome Natalie Robb? You're very welcome for coming along, and thank you for giving up your time in the very bad weather conditions to get here today. If I could ask if you could give us a brief presentation of around 5 minutes. I'll then invite Mary Scanlon to make some comments, and then I'll kick off with a few questions and then ask my colleagues to get involved from there. Is Mary in this session? Natalie Robb.
I'd like to thank you for inviting me here today to talk about placing hyperemesis specialist nurses in Scotland. Hyperemesis is a severe nausea and vomiting in pregnancy which can cause serious complications for both the mother and the baby. According to the British Medical Journal, the number of hyperemesis pregnancies are unknown, but it's said to range from 3 in 1,000 to 20 in 1,000. First of all, I'd like to explain exactly what I'm petitioning for. Midwives, doctors and nurses are not given the training needed to care for women with hyperemesis. I contacted a senior lecturer of midwifery at Napier University to find out exactly what the students are taught. In the second year of their course, they have a complications in pregnancy module, which only has 1 session covering hyperemesis. This session covers etiology, incidence, midwifery and psychological management. This is nowhere near enough to educate a midwife on something up to 2% of their patients may suffer from. A research paper completed in 2004 by Dr. Roger Gadsby of Warwick Medical School in Coventry showed that the estimated cost of each hyperemesis admission is £470 per day. Obviously, due to the date of this paper, the costs will be far higher. In total, I spent 15 days in hospital. I required an ambulance. I used out-of-hours GP service on several occasions, as well as my own GP weekly. I also required consultant-led care due to hyperemesis. These services may not have been required if I'd been given the correct treatment. My hospital admissions alone would have cost more than £7,050. A hyperemesis pregnancy is costing the NHS far more than it has to, and putting a specialist nurse in place could hugely reduce these costs. Currently, there are no specialist nurses in the UK. However, early pregnancy clinics throughout England and Wales, for example Manchester, Birmingham and Cambridge, do treat women with hyperemesis as outpatients, administering IV fluids and medication as necessary. Many hospitals also have guidelines in place on how to treat women with hyperemesis as day patients. Examples of these are the Royal Berkshire and the Royal Cornwall hospitals. In Scotland, only one hospital, Forth Valley, appears to have these guidelines in place. The majority of those suffering from hyperemesis are young, healthy women who can withstand rapid fluid replacement as day patients and be sent home to their own environment with medication. There are lots of different routes that could be taken to both support women with the illness and reduce costs for the NHS. The role could be done by either a registered general nurse or a midwife. It could be in the form of a clinic held in the hospital or maybe home visits in the community. Personally, I think a clinic held in the hospital would be the best way forward. The nurse would be the point of referral from GPs for patients who may be at risk of becoming dehydrated and seriously unwell from sickness during their pregnancy. The main roles of this nurse would be to administer IV fluids, consider medication options for those who require it, monitor the patient, for example, weight, blood pressure, blood tests. They'd also ensure that no problems with the baby and offer support and advice to patients, their families and other health professionals. I hope you can consider the placement of hyperemesis specialist nurses in Scottish hospitals to help both the NHS and families who have to suffer from this awful illness.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. My colleagues and I will have some questions. Could just correct the record, obviously Mary Scanlon's here for the next item. Of course, if she has any particular interest in this one, she's very welcome to raise it. You mentioned Forth Valley. I was going to actually raise that with you. Certainly in the papers and in your petition, it appeared to me that Forth Valley was a good example of how to operate services across Scotland. Would you set up Forth Valley as a sort of exemplar of best practice in Scotland?
Because they have guidelines in place, they're obviously the best hospital for hyperemesis in Scotland, but I don't know the way that they treat women. I don't know what the care is like. I don't know how well they're educated about hyperemesis. I'm only aware of the guidelines. Which
is certainly good practice. And you mentioned that there's not specialist nurses in the rest of the UK.
No.
Have you gone further afield? Is there any examples from Europe, for example, that we could have?
I'm not aware of any.
Right. No. Right. Thank you very much for that. I'll throw them to my colleagues. Chip Brodie.
Yeah. Thank you, Convener, and thank you for your presentation. You said the numbers are can be 20 and 1,000. Is there any, from the information you have, and it's a very good and concise report, are there any regional variations in Scotland, I mean, where this might occur?
I don't understand.
Well, are there more in Glasgow or more in Aberdeen? Or?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think the numbers are known very well at all. There's not much research done on it. So the numbers vary on every site you go on to, but I'm not aware of any town or anything that's...
It was really to establish how many specialist nurses we were talking about and what training. Okay. In the report, we were told that research, I know you said there's not a lot of research, but research has found maternal complications including weight loss, dehydration, acidosis, abnormal liver function, and vitamin deficiencies. Can I ask about, in terms of, if we know the deficiency of particular vitamins, is there any way that you know, pregnant women, pregnant ladies can determine what vitamins they should take to try and avoid this?
I think they should be given advice on what they should have to take. I wasn't given any vitamins at all during my pregnancy, so I was very deficient.
But were they only able to tell you after the event, or?
Yes, yeah.
Not before. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Amit Taggart.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Natalie, for that presentation. Natalie, can I ask is it a recurring illness, or is it just by each pregnancy?
Up to 80% of women will have it in a second pregnancy. So, yeah.
Wow. And also, can I ask, you mentioned earlier that you had contacted the Royal College of Midwives and looked at training, and without, I mean, I'm not a doctor and I wouldn't suspect you are either, are you? But really about the training for, could you elaborate on what the reason was for not training on that?
I wasn't given a reason. They weren't very helpful, to be honest. They just told me what they teach, and they thought that was enough.
Okay, so there wasn't any specific tuition then given for this illness?
It was just in one of their modules, they're given, one of their lectures covers hyperemesis, and that's all they're given in their whole training.
Okay, thank you. It's fine just now, thanks.
John Wilson.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Natalie. The issues that you've raised, and quite clearly is quite worrying, that we don't have any statistics. We're basically, and I'm assuming that based on your presentation, we are only using the British Medical Journal as an example of 2 in 100. Because and just to ask the question, could you indicate whether or not any figures are collected in Scottish hospitals of this condition? And if it's not, why do you think that information is not collected?
I can't find any figures in Scottish hospitals. The figures I've used have been research papers in England. I don't think there's anybody to do the research in Scotland. I don't think there's anybody available to do that research.
Conditions not being recorded in Scottish hospitals,
No,
as far as you're aware?
not as far as I'm aware, no.
Yeah. The other issue, you've asked for specialist nurses on this condition. Could I just seek clarification as to, do you mean specialist nurses concentrating on that subject matter, or nurses with a specialism on this condition that can work, either nurses or midwives, that can work in the general delivery of services, but they can then be called upon to deal with this condition if a patient presents with that condition?
Yeah, it wouldn't need to be somebody who specifically did that job. It could be a midwife who's working elsewhere who has more knowledge than the rest of the midwives, who could maybe hold a clinic a couple of times a week, or it doesn't need to be somebody specifically to do that job.
And you also, sorry about this, Natalie, you also made reference to Forth Valley Health Board, and you say they've got guidelines in place. And you also, and just to try and reiterate what you said, is that you didn't know whether or not they actually had nurses or midwives actually delivering that service. They had guidelines, but no indication of whether or not nurses were available to deliver that type of support service. Mm-hmm. And so that, as you believe, there is no one...
not that I'm aware, no.
Not
just
that
the
you're aware of.
guidelines.
Just the guidelines are there, but no one specifically is
No,
identified as delivering that service when required. Thank you.
Any other colleagues wish to contribute?
Can I come back again? I don't know where I read it, but I think this is what Kate Middleton, Duchess of Cambridge, suffered from. Is that right? Right. Just in terms of the NHS Inform website, when a pregnancy is defined, are the pregnant women advised that they should go on this website so that they can track? So there's no pre-advice in terms of look at this, and if you're suffering from lack of or can't hold fluids down.
No, I mean I can only talk from personal experience, but my GP didn't know what was wrong with me. It wasn't until I was admitted to hospital, severely unwell, that it was recognised.
So you weren't said, given any advice? This is quite important because it's not just with hyperemesis. Any advice as to what conditions to track?
No. None
And you weren't
advice.
told about the NHS Inform website?
No. No.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
Adam Ingram?
Sorry, Natalie, I missed the earlier part of your presentation. But can I ask, what support did you actually have during the course of your experience, particularly in the early days, for example, from your GP or others?
I wasn't given any support. I went to my GP weekly because I was so ill, but I wasn't given support. I was told it was just sickness. I was sent away with a different medication. I was refused medication that did work for me. It wasn't until I was about 27 weeks pregnant that I got referred to a consultant in the hospital. That was the first support I was given.
Right. Now, are you aware of the Scottish Government has refreshed their framework for maternity care, and as part of that there should be an early pregnancy assessment service that people can be referred to. Did you ever hear of such a thing?
No.
And you certainly weren't referred to that
No.
particular service. So I take it you're referred to the consultant. Who were you referred by?
A family member who works with the consultant. It wasn't referred by my
Anything
GP
in the system?
or...
No.
It was done... That's the only reason I got referred.
Right. And obviously you'd be very worried during the course of those 27 weeks. Did you look around for any sort of support perhaps from the pregnancy sickness support charity?
I wasn't aware of them until further into my pregnancy. So it wasn't until I was well into 20 weeks pregnant before I found their website.
And the final question, convener, was: are you looking for a national guideline that that would be provided to health boards to ensure that women who suffer the same sort of condition as you did will have some sort of planned service available for them? Is that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does any other member wish to ask any questions? Okay, I think this is a really interesting petition. I think it makes obviously a lot of sense for us to continue the petition to get further information, certainly from Scottish Government. I think a number of members mentioned the pregnancy sickness support. NCT, certainly I know from the past, is a very good, National Childbirth Trust, a very good organisation. And the Royal College of Midwives certainly would be the ones that would jump out as me as the organisations you look at. Amit Tiger?
Also for GP, would that be the BMA?
Certainly,
Ask
yes.
them for...
To ask about the views of GPs within the BM, certainly. John Wilson?
Thank you. Could I suggest we write to Forth Valley Health Board to ask them why they felt it necessary to introduce guidelines on this issue, and whether or not they do have nursing staff or midwives who specialise in this condition. It'd just be useful to try and find out why they introduced the guidelines in the first place.
Sure, that's a good point. Chip Brody?
Yeah, just to follow on from that, it might appear that Forth Valley are the only ones that follow the framework for maternity care. So I think we need to write to the government and ask them to carry out a survey of the health boards to find out exactly what is happening with regard to the implementation of this framework. From what Natalie has said, and in answer to my question and also Adam's question, it would appear that the guidelines are there and the focus is there, but nobody seems to be following it.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. And Adam Ingram?
Yes, just in addition to Mr. Brody's contribution there, I think we should be asking for consideration of a sign guideline for this particular condition, which is clearly very distressing to people who suffer from it.
I think that's a fair point, and I think also the Royal College of Nursing would be interesting to ask their views on, because this is all around getting specialist nurses, isn't it? So, is there any other points then perhaps we've missed that we need, or any organisations we should also be writing to in addition to the ones that members have raised? Members happy then with that course of action? Well, can I thank you again, Natalie, for coming along and giving evidence. As you can hear, we're very interested in your petition. We're going to continue it, get the evidence, and then at a point in the future, when we've got all the evidence back, we'll look at the next steps, and obviously the clerks will keep you in touch with development. So thank you very much for coming along. We certainly appreciate your contribution, and I'll suspend for 1 minute to allow our witnesses to be changed round. Our second new petition today is PE 1459 by James Mackey on the review of coastal erosion protocols and responsibilities. Members have a note by the clerk, the Spice briefing and the petition. And can I welcome all our petitioners today? You're very welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for travelling in such terrible conditions, I'm sure. I hope your Land Rover was fine all the way through to Edinburgh today. So we've got Mr James Mackey, David Mackay and William Sivright. And I could invite Mr Mackey to make a short presentation of around 5 minutes. That will be then followed by Mary Scanlon. I've got Mary Scanlon the right question this time. And then ask a few questions. My colleagues will continue and invite the other witnesses, if they wish to intervene at any stage, please feel free to do so. I'm going to start with Mr Mackey for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Convener. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. This is a repeat visit to this committee on this particular subject. Last time I submitted a petition on this was in 2005, and at that time the committee of the day decided that that petition was actually ahead of its time, so it was dropped. Things have moved on quite a bit from them since then, and certainly to the detriment of quite a bit of the environment, particularly our area. At the outset, because of things that have happened outside this committee, I would like to state quite clear that this petition was written and submitted by me as a personal petition and in no way is related or supported by any organisation that I may have been part of or currently with. It was just for the committee's benefit and for the record. And Mr Mackay and Mr Sivright are from the same village, and they appear here on a personal basis, not connected to any other organisation that has an interest one way or another in this particular petition. The reason that I put this petition back in was that following the petition in 2005, then we saw this continued erosion on the beach where we live. My business is involved in aquaculture, and through that I travel extensively through the west coast of Scotland, and I was seeing similar problems in other areas. Erosion is something that will always happen. There's areas where erosion could well be good for the environment. In other areas where we've got human habitation, then I suggest that steps have got to be taken somewhere to protect the houses and the livelihood of communities. An odd house here and there, we accept, will have to go, but when you've got a community like we have with over 100 houses and families, then it is a major, major issue. Over the period of time, the issues in our particular village got so bad that in October 2010, Richard Lockhart, who's our MSP, and Angus Robertson, our MP, who were being bombarded by some of the villagers over the situation with the beach and the added separate problem of the River Spey, they called a public meeting at which they called in SEPA, SNH and a number of the various agencies and quangos to discuss the whole issue. There was over 200 villagers turned up at that meeting, and to say that it was not so much a tea party, it got quite riotous because of the fear and things that have gone on. Since then, questions have been asked of the various agencies and quangos, particularly our experience is more on our own doorstep, but I have seen it and noticed it in other parts of Scotland. One thing we've got to note is that the Scottish coastline is the second longest in Europe after Norway, so accept that we've got a major problem with it. And the long story short, that as we see, or I have seen the erosion or problems in one particular area, and initially we were only looking at about half a mile of our own beach, but we started looking further east and west from that, and we could see what the problems were. And the problems that we were seeing was that as the sea came in and eroded the coastline, suddenly the penny dropped. Where is all that material going? We've noticed, we've calculated that there's probably 6 million tonnes of gravel have disappeared off our beach. And then the penny, where has that gone? But because the three of us have been brought up in the village most of our days, suddenly realised that their beach, our sea, was getting shallower and shallower, and through that we saw that seabirds were disappearing, for the anglers stopped catching fish, and there was obviously a barrier. So what we were seeing, instead of, as well as erosion coming inland and threatening the houses, we've started to notice that eroded material is going into the sea, and it's creating problems on the seabed, and we're now hearing about what we think is possibly our gravel turning up in other areas. Over the period of time, discussions have been held with the various organisations, and we were being stonewalled, basically, was what we felt. I've got copies of an email here where we're asking information of one of the council officers, and the questions were getting simpler and simpler, and we were asking him, right, if the council decides that you're going to do some work to stop coastal erosion, whether it's our beach or somewhere else, who would you consult with? And at one point, he's come up with a list of about 50 or 60 different organisations that he felt he must consult with. On the 15th of December, as you will all know, we had one horrendous storm on the east of the coast of Scotland. And our community, Kingston, took one massive, massive battering, to the extent that the sea over 500-metre stretch demolished a 2.5-metre high shingle bank, a bank that was over 30 metres wide, and the high water mark was moved 35 metres inland. You had the sea, the shingle bank, then a lagoon. The force of the sea has reduced the bank and pushed it right in. We've now got experts, including council workers, saying, it's okay, the shingle bank's there, it's just changed its shifted shape, you're okay. But in the process, we've been asking different agencies who is our responsibility. And one is what we're seeing, we're laymen, looking through what legislation we can see, is pure and simple that nobody, no organisation actually has the power to go in and carry out engineering works of any kind to protect any coastline. That is the sort of the main points we would like to raise with you. One of the points you could maybe ask Mr Mackay is actual ownership of the seabed, high water mark, and the land. There's other issues that we have, but at the moment that would be my opening address.
Thank you very much for Mr Mackey, and we'll ask you questions in a few seconds. I'd like to bring in Mary Scanlon first.
Thank you, Convener. Can I thank the committee for allowing me to speak to this petition. My son lives in Garmouth, which is quite close to Kingston, and we did go down a week past Saturday through the play park, and we walked along the shingle bank, so I was able to see the change in the shingle bank, which seemed to be shifting from east to west. And the shingle bank, I think many villagers feel that it's a buffer for the sea, to stop the waves, etc., coming over to their homes. I read the petition summary this morning, Convener, and I don't think it's unreasonable, given that I've read others of the background papers. I do actually think that there is a need for clarity here. And I'm just reading out the second paragraph of the petition. Richard Lockhead stated publicly that coastal erosion is not a government matter. Now, I'm not in any way being critical of Mr Lockhead, but for years there is confusion as to who is responsible. And I do think that the petition asking for a review, I think it would go quite a way to help this. If I just go down to the third paragraph and the summary of the petition, local authorities have legal responsibilities but no legal obligation to do anything about coastal erosion. I think that's the sort of statement from the petitioners that I do think is confusing. Forgive me if my speech is a bit disjointed, but I'm just going through the papers I have in front of me. The next point I would like to raise is from Spice, and I don't think any of us round this table are engineers, so coastal management methods fall into two main categories. It's on page 2, hard engineering and soft engineering. Now, I don't think that there's any of us round this table today that can decide which would be most appropriate. The Scottish Government action, the main piece of legislation is the Coast Protection Act 1949, and it's also stated here Local authorities must decide how to fund such works from within their block grant, the block grant they receive from the Scottish Government. Now, what I'm going to say is not new, and as a list member for the Highlands and Islands convener, I'm sure you will understand this, but Moray has been absolutely exceptional in recent years. I mean, I understand the money within the block grant is less than 50,000. Now, if we take the Elgin scheme, which, as you know, is currently being done, I think from memory it's over 100 million. Yes, that one alone is over 100 million. So when you're looking at asking a council to do something for 48,000, and one of the schemes is costing over 100 million, that gives you the scale of flooding in Moray. There's also been a scheme in Rothes and also Lanbride, and as you will know yourself, the Forest scheme and the Elgin ones are both ongoing. Now we're talking about tens and hundreds of millions of pounds here. I would also say that the Elgin, Rothes, Forest and Lanbride, they are all associated with rivers, whereas what the gentleman here today, they're talking about the sea, the coastal erosion. Now, I don't know if that's a different pot of funding. I'm really not sure. And that's where I feel that we could do with some clarity here. Can I just say, convener, the government, to be fair, I'll be the government spokesman today, but Rosanna Cunningham did say the government had provided funding of 23 billion from 2008 to 10. So it's not that they've not been forthcoming with the funding. I think it's the clarity about how these schemes are funded and what is needed. The other and final point I would make is the main legislation. Well, we had a Flood Risk Management Act passed by this Parliament in 2009, and it contains powers for local authorities to promote flood prevention schemes. I think that it's all very well for a local government to promote it, but I think, A, there has to be unanimity about what's required in terms of this hard and soft engineering. When you're talking about trying to hold the waves back, it's a bit like Robbie Burns, no man can tether time nor tide. You know, it's very different to a river. And I just wanted to say that although there's powers for local government to promote flood prevention schemes, I think we need more clarity on the responsibility. And I spoke to the petitioners outside. I think it's not only the government, it's not only the local authority. Obviously, there are concerns locally, but I think the Crown Estate, I'm not entirely sure what their responsibilities are here. And I think I would find, although the petitioner has been talking about Kingston, I think we're all aware around the coast of Scotland in recent weeks that there have been similar situations. I'm not sure if they're as bad or not, but I do think that the petitioner's summary is reasonable, and I would certainly, and I think most people would find a review so that when flooding does happen, or the fear of flooding, you know, that people know where to go to, where the urgent money can come from, where the short-term measures can come from, and where the long-term measures can be made.
And I thank Mary Scanlon for a very full run-through the various points raised in the petition. I think, Mr Mackey, going back to your contribution, although obviously clearly focused on Moray, I think your petition obviously is a Scotland-wide review.
Right, and it's just been focused on Moray since the storms of the 15th.
Yeah. And that's very understandable. And obviously there's, and as we are facing severe fallout from climate change, clearly we expect this situation to get worse. And Mary Scanlon touched on the defensive remedies, the soft and the hard engineering. And again, as you know, the brief will also highlighted the fact that in Scotland we've got much less defensive work done for coastal erosion, which is an issue I'm sure Mr Mackey and his colleagues will be concerned about. One of the points I picked up, Mr Mackey, in your petition and your general comments was that, if I summarise you felt that there was perhaps too much bureaucratic consultation and not enough action. Would that be a fair summary of your philosophy on this issue?
That's it exactly. That there's consultation, monitoring, but when push comes to shove, there's nothing in place to actually stop the sea coming in. And one of the things all the legislation and everybody talks about flooding. it's not, what we're talking about is actually erosion. The land is being washed away, not necessarily that the water is coming over the land and doing the damage. It's completely disappearing. And one of the things that we've noticed, or is first hand of where this gap in guidance and legislation is, that one of our local councillors asked, on the 18th of December, asked Murray Council in a meeting, can the council put a machine down to Kingston to drag some of the gravel back up onto the beach to protect? And the executive director said, no, council will be spending money, therefore we'll have to go out and do a survey of the area, we'll have to cost it out, go out to tender. Whereas 10 miles along the road in Lossiemouth, the harbour wall was pushed over, but because that was part of an established structure, then that week they were able to go in, clean up and start rebuilding that wall without any consultation whatsoever. So that's part of the sort of thing, the frustration that we see.
And just before I throw in from the questions from, first of all, Chick Brodie, you may know that the committee has looked at the wider issue of flooding. We had some evidence about flood insurance, and there may well be further follow-up on that issue. But I'd just like to remind colleagues that we're talking about coastal erosion rather than generic flooding. Can I start with Chick Brodie?
Thank you, Convener. It's the point I was just about to make, that we are talking about, although there is a conjunction in some ways between erosion and flooding in certain areas, that we are talking about coastal erosion. Can I just be clear, Mr Mackey, in terms of where the council are at? I mean, you've just explained what actually happens with the council in Murray. Based on whatever information you've got, is that approach applied by other councils around the coast?
As far as we understand from looking at legislation and looking at the roles of the various agencies, what we're seeing on our doorstep seems to be a standard procedures across the whole of Scotland, in that the councils have got the responsibility to monitor what's going on, but they don't have the right or the powers that we see to go and actually do emergency work to protect buildings or livelihoods that are there. The agencies, I could speak for about 20 minutes on the agencies and different powers, but basically high water mark to sea is Marine Scotland. We've spoken to them. They don't want to know anything about coastal erosion until somebody applies for a permit to do engineering. Once you come over the high water mark and onto the dry land, as we call it, it's SEPA, and they've got attitudes of their own. And in between this, we've got the below high water mark is owned by the Crown Estates. And Mr Mackay's got more knowledge on that than what I have. Maybe you want to make a couple of points on the sort of ownership and where it's gone from, if that was...
Before we go to Mr Mackay, just on the Crown Estates. Crown Estates is a very profitable organisation, is investing a lot through coastal communities provisions, and it seems paradoxical to me that while they're making lots of money off the coasts, that and despite some of the funding they provide, that they don't consider this as serious implications for their, in inverted commas, business. I mean, so when we talk about local authorities, can you also tell me what approach the Crown Estates are taking on this?
Crown Estates own about 2/3 of Solent, if you want to call it, the seabed beyond the high water mark. Round Scotland, they don't own all of it. I think it's Orkney and Shetland, they've no property up there. Any dealings as an individual I've had with Crown, and years ago up in Sutherland and more recently in Murray, they're very difficult to track down. The beach is not their immediate responsibility. They go back to the 1949 Coastal Protection Act and say it's the council. But for an organisation that grossed something like 320 million last year, with a net of about, I think it was 6.7 in Scotland and 72 in England, I'm not saying they should be totally responsible, but my concern as an individual is, why should they, as landowners, put the onus on the taxpayer? Should there not be some kind of clear-cut policy if, for instance, let's take the Kingston 15th and 16th of December storm, Nothing was done because the council didn't have the facilities. But they were not the landowners, the council. Surely the Crown, as landowners, there should be something in place that says get down there, and even if you put sandbags along the top of the beach just in case the tide comes up overnight. There is no clear-cut legislation.
Yeah, I mean, I have some sympathy with that view, but given the answers that the Minister has given both in 2011 and 2009, I mean, the local authority, surely under the Coast Protection Act of 1949, must understand exactly what their responsibilities are, and part of that must surely be to establish some relationship with the Crown Estates, as they have done in the case of offshore wind, in some cases, in terms of their responsibilities regarding the coast. So, are you aware of any conversations that have taken place or meetings that have taken place between the local authorities and the Crown Estates, or
Over the last, excuse me, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you short. Over the last 20 years, now I've been river flooded frequently, but this is not the issue we're talking about. But anything I've gone to, and I involve myself quite deeply in coastal issues, flooding issues, there is very rarely a representative from the Crown present, even if they've been invited. And I've found that, with respect, Mr. Brodie, in many other dealings I've had with the Crown. If they don't want to know, they go somewhere else. And I'm sorry, they are responsible to the Crown Commissioners, who reports to the First Lord of the Treasury, who, if I'm right, is the Prime Minister. Is that not a total cop-out?
also compounded under the recent...
Sorry, that's probably not the proper expression to use in this building.
It's also compounded by the recent Sovereign Act, where the royal family enjoy 15% of the profits of the Crown Estates. And you might wish to appeal to them at some stage.
Mr McCarry, are you aware of the Scottish Affairs Committee from Westminster who have looked into the Crown Estate Commission, and they have recommended that their powers and effectively the revenue they have would be delegated to Scottish Parliament? But in more detail than that, they're actually suggesting it will go down to harbour trusts, to community landowners, and so on. So you would have what they would call sort of tertiary devolution. In other words, if there was a local harbour trust in your area, that any marine rights that they would generate, which would go to Crown Estate, would actually go to the harbour trust. So they would have another source of income. This is a slight tangent from the direct discussion today, but I was just wondering whether you were aware of that.
I had heard of it, but I hadn't studied it because I didn't. The word harbour sort of clicked in when it was first mentioned to me, and I pushed it away because Mr. Mackey and I's principal consideration is what's happening to the coastline. Harbours are basically self-maintaining if there are funds, there are local harbour trusts, that there are council, there are other. What we are looking at is the areas where there appears to be no available funding and certainly no management scheme. That is the principal point. There is no scheme, no legislation. Somebody can say, this is what we do.
Sure. I just thought I'd highlight that.
No, thank you for that, and I will dive home the 200 miles and have a look at it.
It's a very interesting point. We actually debated this, and I think it's fair to say there was very strong support of that view of a change in sort of the management of it.
Understanding is there's a lot of similar situations to what we've got, particularly in the Western Isles. And again, they're the same. I know that they're the same situation. That there's no harbours, there's nothing. It's communities that are being damaged.
Yes. So, but they are suggesting in this report that community land groups could access this, such as the Harris Trust, for example. So I would recommend you have a look at the report. It's very useful. Can I bring in Angus MacDonald?
Thank you, Convener. Can I just say some of us are looking forward to not just the Crown Estates transferring to the Scottish Parliament. Good morning, panel. In your submission, Mr. Mackey, you make reference to a local forum with no powers being set up in the Kingston area, presumably. Is there a local coastal partnership in the Murray, covering the Murray coastline, or indeed a shoreline management plan that you're aware of?
There's mention of it, and any reference we've had, it's been pointed back towards Murray Council that are having the responsibility for that area. One of the things that we've found was that there were 6 Highland, North of Scotland local authorities had come together as a consortium to draw in consultancies or consultants to look at any particular issue, and that's run by Argyll, or controlled by Argyll and Bute Council. I'd written to them under the FOI, and the information I got back was basically that they were there as a group, and only one council had ever asked for the services of that organisation. And what comes back to what the experience that we have, and I'm getting that drift coming from other areas, is that when there is a threat on a coast, it doesn't matter what part of the coast, at the moment it just seems that the local authority is assumed to be responsible for it. They look at it, their own internal engineers say yes, and then the first thing they do is, right, we must get experts in to come in, look at it, draw up plans, tell us what's gone wrong. And we know that there's been, over the years, there's been 3 or 4 different experts brought in on behalf of the council to draw up the plans, and then as soon as they're drawn up, they're shelved. So under the current system, nothing happens. One of the questions asked Murray Council was, do you have a register of the areas within your coastline that are under threat from erosion? They didn't. They don't even keep a record of that. And again, by asking questions, that does not appear to happen. There's not, as far as we can understand, any records or database of any of these areas under threat around the whole of the Scottish coast. I understand from a discussion with Richard Lockhart that there's something in the pipeline organising that will be into areas, but nobody seems to keep a record and nobody wants to know.
Okay, so as far as you're aware, there are no records. You've used the situation in Murray as an example, but you've also mentioned areas that you're aware of in the Western Isles in your travels through your work. Can you give us any specific examples that have come to your
I believe one of the major areas is the home village of Mike Mackenzie, the MSP. Apparently, I believe that there's a lot of problems around there. And I know in the Uists, there was problems there when they put in causeways that created coastal erosion deposition problems, because one of the things we've picked up in the Murray Firth, where we've been initially we were looking at erosion, we now understand that in other parts of the Firth, deposition of materials is becoming a major problem, both on the coast but also, we believe, out onto the seabed, so that's creating problems elsewhere in the environment.
Okay. Also in your submission, you refer to academics, ideologists and some colourful language, tree huggers. I was just curious what background you have with regard to this issue, if any.
Very simple. I spent the first 4.5 years of my life in Kingston. I spent the next 12 in the village of Garmouth. I joined the police force when I was 16, left when I was 27. Since 1985, I've been primarily involved in developing veterinary medicines for aquaculture, and during that period have worked on sea cages, not only in Scotland but overseas as well. I take quite an interest in agriculture and in environmental issues. I was a founder member, trustee of the Forth Fishery Conservation Trust, which was set up to originally to stop salmon poaching, but we got involved in other areas from there. And my comments on the academics is quite simple, and it's from their presentations at public meetings. For example, if you look at SNH, they have published documents on the Spey Bay area, where we are in the Murray Firth, and they come out quite clearly and say that no work should be done to prevent river or coastal erosion, that Mother Nature should be allowed to take its course, and if there's man-made structures in its way, the way of nature, then they should be allowed to go. SEPA is very much same sort of manner in which they approach things. As mentioned, we've got a problem with the river, but looking at their guidelines, if you've got a problem with the river, their guidelines are that you do not touch the bank, you don't enter the water. So it's when you actually, as very much a lay person, looking at looking at the environment, we're living with it, we enjoy it, we use it, we see what's happening, and then you see others who appear with letters after their name. We wonder what the heck they're seeing. We see a situation and they come up and completely opposite, just leave it and let it go. It's very, very frustrating, and that comment is very much the comments of the whole of the community, not just me.
And one final question, Convener. Given that last response, have you engaged a flooding engineer personally, or one of the groups that you represent? Has there been a flooding engineer given a report to the Kingston community on this?
It comes down to, for the local groups and the community in general, just don't have that funding. Should the community council want to go down that route, or the local amenities, it's not on. The local groups probably have a funding, an annual budget of between £1,500 and £2,500. We know that Moray Council brought a consultant up, and he was on site. He was up twice for 2 days to Moray, and that, we understand, cost Moray Council between £5,000 and £8,000 just for one man to appear for 2 days, and then say that the beach is okay. And it's not. Again, I come back. It's not flooding. It's total erosion. It's removal.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Mackey, you made reference earlier in response to one of the questions about you believe in at least 4 occasions plans have been drawn up by Moray Council, but these plans have been shelved. What were these plans that you made reference to?
There's been this question of the erosion of the Kingston Beach going back decades, and every now and again when the subject rises, it seems to be that the Council's first reaction is to engage an expert to draw up a report, and that's as if it sort of keeps the natives quiet. Something's seen to be done, but as soon as that report has come up, it's discussed, it's in the public domain, then it's quietly sort of shelved.
The reason why I'm raising this question, Commissioner, is that if reports have been, or work has been commissioned, reports have been produced, then some of the arguments within the submission you made clearly undermines Moray Council's argument that they need to spend between £1 and £4 million on commissioning a report to look at the coastal area if these reports have already been commissioned and are in the public domain. Surely the Council could just revert back to those reports.
The last expert that they brought up said that the previous report would not work, and at the end of the day it's all opinions, and no work has, only one piece of work has been done in Kingston Beach, I think I'm correct, 30 years ago, when the £178,000 used to shore up one part.
25 years ago. They shored up the back of the beach, and it's actually the only part of the beach that has never moved, because it worked.
It was carried out 25 years ago.
Yeah, they dumped hardcore and rock armour, which they wouldn't be allowed to do now because it's now an SSI, and SNH wouldn't allow alien stone, as they call it, to be brought in. If I could supplement your question to Mr Mackey, Babcock and Aberdeen University did a massive research project on the beach and the River Spey. It was a combined project in 1992 or 93. They were actually on site for 6 months. They offered 6 to 8 options, as I remember, cost-wise, going up, starting at 480,000 and going up to about 25 million for various solutions. The next report was about 2000, I think, and when it was brought up that there was this previous report that they could possibly use as homework, they were told it was time-served, it was out of date, it wouldn't work, because the dynamics of that's the trouble with Shingle Beach and such like, and the Spey, it's very dynamic, it's changing all the time. And the reports have just gradually got less and less. The latest, while Mr Mackey's petition doesn't intend to undermine the council, Moray Council, they have actually for several years only offered 2 choices, do nothing or do minimum. And yet nothing seems to have been done, and minimum certainly hasn't been done.
The issue here is that it's what can be done to stop this tidal erosion from being carried out, and what solution would you think would be the best solution if in an ideal world, what would you want the council to do to stop this coastal erosion?
That would have to be analysed by a proper coastal expert. Because you'll never stop water, you'll never stop beaches moving. So it comes back to, yes, a consultant would have to be used. Murray Council have admitted to me in a private conversation that they don't have the knowledge. They don't have the specifics.
Come in on that. Kingston sits immediately west of the mouth of the River Spey. If you go east, you have the village of Tugnet, and then it goes through the villages of Port Gordon into Buckie. In circa 1985, the erosion at Tugnet was such that the water was right at the sea, came in and started to remove the cesspools for those houses. Grampian Council at that time went in immediately and put in armour rock along the edge of the leading edge of the beach to protect the houses. Since that armour rock went in, the beach at Tugnet has built out 70, 80 yards, where on the Kingston side it has come in 70, 80 yards. And we've seen that east and west of where we are, that wherever a council in the past has put in armour rock, the beach has stayed steady, the land behind it has been absolutely rock solid safe. And wherever the armour rock finishes, then the sea starts to come in. And at the moment, there seems to be a block from the academics. You cannot use armour rock on a beach because it will create a problem elsewhere. But the problem that we've got is creating bigger problems, both locally and, we now know, on a wider field. The figure you've mentioned, of £1.4 million, is basically for a computer study, and we feel that there's no data from the area that can be used in a computer study.
Convener, it's just Mr Mackey made a comment reference to a proper coastal expert. Define a proper coastal expert to actually carry out this study, because clearly if studies have been carried out and yet it appears that every time a study is carried out, the next study that comes along contradicts the previous study, who would you determine would be a proper, I think the wording you use, proper coastal expert?
For a coastal engineer, I honestly couldn't answer that, but there has to be an answer there somewhere. I was just thinking while Mr Mackey was talking, across in the Ardnamurchan Peninsula, where I go quite a lot, there's the new road from Marlake down towards Fort William. The old road's been made into a wee scenic route, and there used to be some lovely coves and beaches along there. Now, for some reason, Island Council have put armour rocking in some of the coves, and the wee beaches are still there, and you go round a corner and the Lochen is practically coming up to the road because, as we all know, side levels are rising. So somebody had common sense, why they haven't done it the whole way, but it doesn't encourage, sorry, we have to come back to Kingston because it's the most recent example. It doesn't encourage people living next to the sea, who've lived next to the sea for 55, 60, 70 years, to be told by an expert that there's not very much can be, a proper coastal erosion engineer, that there's not very much can be done for Kingston Beach, and Kingston won't be there in 50 years anyway. And those were his words in public. That's now, there's been a whole lot of ideas put forward, and they're immediately rejected. Nobody sits down and listens to these ideas, and that's one of the things we're looking for, is some sort of legislation or definitive instruction that says, throw everything into the pot before you go and get a consultant engineer. There might just be something comes out of it. People who live next to the sea all their lives know it better than anybody else. They know how it moves. They know the nuances. As I say, you're never going to stop the sea, and it's all, by the way things are going globally, it looks as if the sea is going to keep rising. Currents change. Rather than just looking at books, facts and figures, you have to look at the live thing, and the live thing is the coast, because it isn't a live thing. That's a little bit dramatic, but it's the best way I can put it.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Convener.
Thank you. Chuck Brodie.
Yeah. I have to say, firstly, the image of my friend Mike Mackenzie sitting like King Canute on his local beach is an image I shall treasure forever. I know that Mr Mackay, you said that Mr Mackey's report does not criticise the council, but if I look at the numbers that you say under the National Flood Risk Assessment, there are 125,000 houses, at risk under the flood the likely flood damage, and that 17% of these around the coast, that works out about 21,000 houses. I don't know how many there are in Murray, but I would have thought that the council, together with SEPA, might be persuaded to have a look at what clearly is a problem not just for your locality, but it certainly could be a pilot to look at. And I would have assumed that SEPA, having procured what we call experts on flooding, that they might be able to tap into coastal experts as well. But it does appear to me that the council, and together with the Crown Estates, are not doing or not taking the responsibility that they should. And I'll make a comment on that at the end, if I may, Convener.
Sure, certainly.
Your last statement, because what we've repeatedly said, pointed out to the council officials and the councillors, is that in the one community we're looking at houses that have a face value of over £10 million, and if the breach comes through there and sea rolls to the next village, then there's public utilities that's going to cost somewhere in the region of £14 million to replace. But we just get this: we need to do reports, we need to do studies, and nothing is happening other than the fact that the sea is coming closer and closer to the houses and creating fear, actual fear within some of the community.
What do if I may, just last question, what do the insurance companies say to those that are living in potentially exposed areas? I mean,
You've one with first-hand experience.
Knew you were going to ask me that. Sorry. All right, can I split this into two, the River Spey and the beach? I know we're here about the beach, but to answer your question, I've been flooded 19 times since 1990, and I still get insurance. Not a lot, and it costs me a fortune, and I've had to spend a fortune on my house. It hasn't affected the insurance premiums of anybody yet in our postcode. Kingston, only one house has ever flooded in the last 30 years that I can remember, and that was actually due to a tidal burn. So you couldn't actually say it was the tide directly. And I've never heard of anybody moaning to me that their insurance premiums have gone up because of their postcode, because actually Kingston's a separate postcode. One of the things that somebody said to me was, would it devalue the house? And I'm a layman in this, but I haven't sold a house for about 30 years. And I said, if you had to get a pre-sale survey, any surveyor worth his salt would find out if there had been any flooding and property damage, which there hasn't been. So the same, I would assume, applies to insurance. But not to say that could change.
I'm afraid we're a bit short on time. Again, I would perhaps refer you to another debate that we had, where you may know that the UK government's having negotiations with the insurance industry, and the agreement to underwrite insurance companies to insure people who've been flooded runs out in June. And this committee is also looking at that aspect of flooding. So you might be interested in having a look at our debate with Professor Crichton, who gave us some evidence recently. It does tie into the wider issue about flooding. So can I thank you very much for coming along and giving evidence. It's now up to the committee to look at the next steps. Certainly, my suggestion is this is a very interesting petition that we need to continue to get more information, particularly from the Scottish Government, from SEPA, the Scottish Coastal Forum. But we've also mentioned the Crown Estate Commissioners, so I think it would be useful to write to the Crown Estate as well, because they, as you say, are a very crucial organisation. And I'm sure my colleagues will have some other suggestions as well.
Well, primarily that was it. I think neither the Council nor the Crown Estates can absolve themselves of any responsibility. And I think it is incumbent, Convener, for us to write to the Crown Estates to understand what their view is, which will be interesting for the rest of Scotland, and also the local council.
I think also, just to be clear, we need to ensure what are the questions that we're asking these organisations. I think it would be around the questions that are posed by the petition, which will help. John Wilson?
Yeah, can also suggest convener we write to COSLA, because it's taken out the Murray Council scenario, given that the petition emanated from issues arising in Moray, but I think we need to write to COSLA as well to find out what their guidance is to local authorities who are faced with these situations. Yeah. And given that we actually the reference was made to SNH, could I suggest we write to SNH to ask them their views on the mitigation measures that could be applied to protect some of the coastal areas that are threatened from this shift in the coast through erosion or through high water shift and movement of the sandbanks.
Thank you for that. Other members wish to contribute? Are members happy then with that course of action? This is a real interesting petition. We need to concentrate on the coastal erosion aspects and ask the various organisations we're writing to their views on the petition and the questions that have been raised from that.
Yep.
Thank you for that. Can I thank again then our three witnesses for taking the time today to travel so far in bad conditions to give evidence. I appreciate your hard work today in doing that and your presentation. We'll obviously keep you up to date with developments. Can also thank Mary Scanlon for coming along and helping our considerations today. And I'll suspend for 1 minute to allow our witnesses to leave. The third new petition today is PE 1462 by Marion Ferguson in behalf of the IVACTOR patient interest group on a new treatment for cystic fibrosis. Members have a note by the clerk, the SPICE briefing and the petition. But since this petition was lodged and the committee obviously invited the petitioner to attend, matters have moved on. The Scottish Medicines Consortium, the SMC, decided not to recommend IVACTOR for use in the NHS in Scotland. Earlier this week, however, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing announced that the Scottish Government will launch a fund to cover the cost of medicines for individual patients with rare conditions which are not available for routine prescription. The fund is for medicines not recommended for routine use by the Scottish Medicines Consortium. At the end of last week, a joint statement was issued by the Cabinet Secretary and the IVACTOR patient interest group indicating that the drug will be funded through this new fund and that the Scottish Government would be taking action to ensure there is no barrier for clinicians to prescribe it. On that basis, the petitioner is satisfied that there has been a successful outcome for the petition. And if I could just summarise to the committee the last sentence in the evidence which was submitted as a late paper, members might not have had a chance to read this, but if I can just quote a couple of lines. Whilst the IPIG's specific concerns in relation to access to IVACTOR appears to have been addressed, meantime, through the creation of this new Rare Conditions Medicines Fund, this may not always be the case for similar future medicines and conditions, unquote. My suggestion to the committee is because the conditions that the petitioner has set out in the petition have been met and have been satisfied, it would seem to me sensible that we close the petition, but perhaps it might be useful to let the Health and Sport Committee know what our outcomes have been today and what our discussions have been today, but I would firmly move then that we close this petition. Is that agreeable? Thank you for that. Can I then move on to the fourth and final new petition today? It's PE 1450, again by James Mackey, on the environment and genetic impact on natural stocks of sea and brown trite. Members have a note by the clerk, the SPICE briefing and the petition. Whilst members may want a wider debate on this, could I recommend that we refer to the Rural Affairs and Climate Change and Environment Committee under Rule 15.6.2 as part of their scrutiny of the Aquaculture and Fisheries Scotland Bill? Is that agreeable? Yep. Thank you. Angus MacDonald.
Yeah, just to say that being a member of the RACI committee, It is a complex issue, and there are strong views on either side of the argument. The committee is currently looking at the draft Stage 1 report, which is coming to committee tomorrow. And a number of these issues have been looked at as part of the extensive evidence research that we've done. Indeed, we've visited a hatchery that has both wild and farmed fish, albeit in separate areas of the hatchery, so we are aware already of the issues, but I'm sure the committee would certainly welcome a sight of the petition.
Yeah, thank Mr MacDonald for his comments, and thank the committee for agreeing to this course of action. Can move then to agenda item 2, consideration of current petitions. The next item of business is consideration of current petitions, and there's one current petition for our consideration today. It's PE 1438 by Lindsay Patty on improving services for people with mental illness. Members have a note by the clerk, it's paper 5, and the submissions. Obviously, I'll invite correspondence and recommendations from members, but I would suggest that we actually continue this particular petition because there's quite a number of outstanding notifications from health boards and others still to come back to us. So it would be useful, I think, to get that. But nevertheless, can I ask comments from members? Adam Ingram.
Yeah, I was very interested in the response, particularly from Sam H and Penumbra, who actually went into some detail with regards to issues that need to be addressed, particularly in terms of implementation of the mental health strategy, timetabling, other issues, and I think it would be useful to pull that together once we've had all the evidence and consider where we take this. I note that the Health and Sport Committee is perhaps not hugely focused on mental health this term, and I was going to ask what alternatives would be available to us in taking forward the issues that this petition has exposed.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, as I think members have said frequently in the past over the last year and a half, that we're not obviously simply a referral agency to other committees. A number of reasons for that. Some subjects straddle a number of committee subjects. Secondly, it may well be for some subjects that we actually, as individuals, have a lot of expertise that would benefit. And I think it is important that we do see our committee as being able to have further reports, for example, as we're going to discuss later in private about child sexual exploitation, using the chamber on occasion, having special Friday events, visiting mental health institutions, for example, as part of a wider experience of what the committee could do. So I think there's a number of things that this committee can do more than just referring on to individual other committees. But I think, meantime, it'd be useful to get some of that information back required before making final decisions. I would also highlight that there is a debate, Scottish Government debate, this Thursday on mental health, and members who've got particular interest may wish to raise some of the subjects raised by the petitioner on Thursday afternoon. I'm certainly speaking and will certainly intend doing that. And I think there's obviously, as members know, we have a chamber slot of 2 hours in May, and what we agreed to do is we would get the slot and we decide near the time what the actual subject area will be, because there may well be a burning issue nearer May that the committee feels is the most appropriate subject. And there's a number of subjects on the potential agenda. And I mentioned flooding already, I've mentioned child sex exploitation already, but committee members may have their own views on what the best subject to take forward is. Do any other member wish to contribute? So then I think we've agreed that we're continuing this petition so we can get the information that so far hasn't come back. So therefore we're continuing this to a future meeting. It was agreed that the committee will now go into private session for the final agenda item of today's meeting, and I don't think there's any members in the gallery. So can I formally close this committee so that the committee then can meet in private?